Let's just dive straight into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating excerpt from the Mahabharata, specifically focusing on the legendary king Dushmanta. We're going to look at this one specific story, a royal hunting expedition that honestly tells us so much about how ancient epics viewed power, nature, and the sheer unstoppable force of a monarch. And look, this wasn't just some casual weekend trip into the woods. It is an incredibly dramatic event that literally shakes the earth. What's really wild about this narrative is the stark contrast we're about to explore. On one hand, the text completely glorifies the monarch's divine power, painting Dushmanta as this unparalleled, awe-inspiring hero. But on the other hand, it details what we today would absolutely call a total ecological disaster. It's this fascinating duality, right? So we're going to unpack exactly how the text balances this immense glory with, quite frankly, unbelievable carnage. Section 1. The Grand Departure. A God King's Parade. We kick things off with the king leaving his city, heading toward the forest with a terrifyingly massive force. I mean, we're not talking about a small hunting party here. This was a massive fourfold army. Dushmanta brought hundreds of horses and elephants, and he was backed up by foot soldiers, car warriors, cavalry, and elephant riders. These were hardened heroes armed with swords, lances, spears, you name it, even stout clubs. Just the sheer logistical footprint of this army marching out simply to, slay some deer, it's absolutely staggering. And I really want you to imagine the intense noise of this parade. The source text is just packed with these rich auditory details that create a deafening tumult as the king marches. You've got these leonine or lion-like roars of the warriors mixing with the blasting notes of conch and the heavy rhythmic beating of drums. Add to that the mechanical rattle of chariot wheels, the terrifying shrieks of huge elephants, the neighing of horses, the metallic clash of weapons. The author really wants us to feel the overwhelming sensory overload of this procession before they even reach the trees. Now, as all of this is happening, beautiful ladies are watching from the terraces of these grand mansions, and they're comparing Dushmanta to Sakra, elevating him to this undeniable godlike status. If you're wondering, Sakra is the king of the Celestials, the mighty wielder of the thunderbolt. So, by likening Dushmanta to Sakra, the onlookers are basically saying he's capable of single-handedly repulsing the elephants of his enemies. To them, he isn't just a man, he is the literal embodiment of divine, unstoppable force walking right through their streets. The citizens just absolutely adored him. They were showering his head with flowers as he rode past on this proud elephant, fully accompanied by the blessings of Brahmanas. They called him a tiger among men, equating his prowess in battle to the Vasus, which are these incredibly powerful elemental deities. They genuinely believed his arms were so mighty that no enemy could possibly survive him. The whole city, from Brahmanas to Sudras, actually followed him out in a state of pure gladness until he finally had to command them to stop so he could actually get on with the hunt. Moving on to Section 2, the immovable wild, entering the forest. So all that urban adoration is left behind as Dushmanta gets into his winged speed chariot and finally enters the wilderness. The narrative totally shifts here to the vastness of nature. The text uses this ancient measurement, yojanas, to really emphasize the sprawling, waterless, and totally unpopulated vastness of the rocky forest stretching out in front of them. As his chariot wheels rattled across the earth and echoed up into the heavens, he looked out over an expanse spanning many yojanas, which is a tremendous distance. This was the place completely devoid of humans, fiercely wild and absolutely untamed. But notice how the source describes this landscape. It calls it a celestial garden, like Antanandana itself, which is a bit of a beautiful contradiction, right? Because at the same time, it's this harsh, waterless, rocky terrain filled with dangerous predators. The text highlights all this diverse flora, vilwa, arca, kadira, kapitha, and dava trees. But the soil is uneven, just scattered with loose stone blocks that fell from neighboring cliffs. It's this majestic, untouched ecosystem teeming with deer, lions, and terrible beasts of prey, existing in this perfect, rugged balance. Well, until this very moment, anyway. Which brings us to Section 3, the Royal Massacre, the Collision.
The crucial turning point is what happens next. That peaceful tranquility is totally shattered as Dushmanta and his warriors violently agitate the forest. This isn't a peaceful nature walk, it's an invasion. The text specifically walks us through his combat techniques, showing exactly how systematically the king slaughtered the denizens of the wild. He was a master at every range. He used piercing arrows to drop numerous tigers from a distance. If a beast got too close, out came the heavy sword. He hurled darts with unmatched precision and fearlessly wandered around whirling a heavy mace, just delivering these fast-ascending blows. It was a calculated, sweeping destruction of the forest apex predators.
And the impact on the wildlife is just instantaneous and tragic. Animals lose their leaders and scatter in absolute terror. The text paints a really vivid picture of this disturbance. To the warriors, this was delightful, warlike sport. But for the animals, it was an apocalypse. The mighty lions, the usual kings of this domain, actually abandoned the forest in sheer numbers out of panic. Entire herds of animals, suddenly leaderless, ran blindly in all directions, uttering these loud, anxious cries of distress. Let's look at Section 4, the devastating aftermath. We really have to confront the somber reality of the chaos left in the wake of this supposedly glorious military exhibition, and the text does not shy away from the brutal details here. Animals ran until they were utterly fatigued. Hoping for water, they reached riverbeds only to find them perfectly dry, and as they collapsed, unable to slake their thirst, the hungry warriors just descended on them. The source explicitly tells us that some animals were eaten raw right as they fell, while others were quartered and roasted and fires lit right there in the devastated woods. It's incredibly grim. Which leads to this shockingly visceral detail and honestly a really dark irony. The warriors who came to hunt were violently crushed by the maddened, bleeding elephants. They panicked in the first place. The text describes strong wild elephants, totally maddened by their wounds, fleeing with their trunks raised high. But the physical toll of their terror is so graphic. They're betraying symptoms of alarm by urinating, ejecting the contents of their stomachs, and vomiting blood in large quantities. In their absolute blind panic, these massive creatures trampled many of the invading warriors to death. The hunters literally became the victims of the chaos they unleashed. So by the end of the expedition, the sharp weapons of the king's followers had completely stripped this vast ecosystem of its natural majesty. The text concludes the segment by noting that the forest, which had just recently been full of vibrant wildlife, was suddenly made empty. The king and his followers had systematically erased the lions, the tigers, and all the other creatures the text refers to as the monarchs of the wilderness. Essentially, one monarch of men entirely displaced the monarchs of nature. I want to leave you with this thought to reflect on how our understanding of power, glory, and the natural world has evolved since these ancient epics were written. In the context of the Mahabharata, King Dushmanta's ability to conquer a harsh wilderness and slay its beasts was the ultimate proof of his divine, heroic status. But when we look at the raw details today, the fleeing herds, the dry riverbeds, the panicked elephants, it's impossible not to see the ecological tragedy. It really forces us to ask, how do we define heroism and dominance over nature today? Thanks for exploring this fascinating historical narrative with me. Keep asking questions and keep learning.